Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Anthony Moreno. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the Chamizal Convention of 1963. The Chamizal Treaty put to end a land dispute between the U.S. and Mexico regarding the Rio Grande. In 1864, a flood had shifted the river, which serves as a border between the two countries, resulting in a long dispute that lasted nearly 100 years. My guest is Nestor Valencia. Mr. Valencia is a former chief city planner for El Paso. He was heavily involved in the process of the treaty. Nestor is now retired and still involved somewhat in civic activities. He is an artist and owns a gallery in Anthony, New Mexico. Mr. Valencia, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, for years, travelers have crossed the Rio Grande, and it's going back centuries. I was wondering if you could start off with giving us a brief history lesson of the Rio Grande and what it was to travelers prior to actual official boundaries being lined out.
Well, you know, the river is the history of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. It is the history of the region, and it goes back many millions of years when it started. And I'll try to make the story short, but for millions of years, the water from the Colorado area came to El Paso and the Las Cruces and Mesilla area, and interestingly enough, it just ended here. And by ending here in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez and the region, what happened is the river created this huge basin of water, which a lot of people call the Coronado Lake. And that's basically why we have water in El Paso and Ciudad Juarez and the region, is because for millions of years the river just brought the water here and created this massive basin. Later on, perhaps a million years later on, the river continued on to Brownsville and to the Gulf of Mexico. But by then we had created this beautiful watershed that we now use. The river has been the home of the Indians, the Native Americans in this area, and it was home to the Tiguas, the Mansos, the Piros, the Tompiros, and many other tribes. And then we have, of course, the Spaniards arriving here in the 1600s, using from Mexico, going to Santa Fe and using the Paso of the North, Paso del Norte, as their way out on from Mexico City to Santa Fe. And that's why Juarez was established, because this was a point where the caravans would stop, and then they would continue on to Albuquerque and Isleta in New Mexico, which was the major route. Interestingly enough, just a sideline, if the caravan started in Mexico City, it would take 9 months from the beginning to the end to get to Santa Fe and get everybody. That was a trip. That's how long it took.
Well, you know, we go down the years to 1848 with the war ending and a treaty being signed. Could you tell us a little bit about the official boundaries that were set and really how that changed drastically in not too long afterwards?
Yeah, but we have to go a little bit before that, and that is that we have to remember that up till 1821, this whole area was Spain. It was Spanish governed, it was Spanish ruled. And 1821, the Spaniards are no longer here, and Mexico takes over. And so Mexico is the government. Mexico is the government of Mexico and the government of 33% of what Mexico lost during the War of 1848, which was Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and all this, the western part of the United States. So from 1821 to 1848, we were governed, this was Mexican government. In 1848, during the Treaty of Guadalupe, the boundary was set by the end of the war between the United States and Mexico. And it was decided that at that point, we fixed the boundary and we said from the smelter town, or from smelter, where smelter is or was, all the way to San Diego. It was going to be a dry boundary marked by monuments indicating the international line. From that point on to Brownsville, the deepest part of the river would be the international boundary. Very important in many aspects of the boundary, including what created the boundary, the boundary dispute between Mexico and the United States. That is to say, the Chamizal dispute. As we recall, we know where the boundary was in 1852. It was demarked by both the international commissioners. And in 1864, we have this violent flood overnight. Anthony, the boundary, the channel of the river moves south, from one day to another. And the old river boundary, which was, quote, the deepest part of the river, was left north of the new boundary. What happened is that during that change, about 437 acres of land were lost in the in-between. And while the people that owned that property, Mexican nationals, felt that that was still their property, that notwithstanding the fact that the river changed, channel changed abruptly, that the property that they farmed and they used and they owned was still theirs. And it was about 6 years later that the American government said, you can't come over. This is now north of the river, this is now United States property, and you no longer own this. That's the whole dispute.
Now, during that dispute, I mean, you have people who were living on one side of the border, and then overnight, they're, in a different country, according to, different sides. What type of, disputes happened from that process to really get to the level of reaching both governments?
Well, perhaps fortunately, the property that was left north of the New River was mostly, if not all, agriculture. So very few people, if any, lived there. And so it was more of letting the Mexican nationals come in and farm their land rather than to have a population in an urban setting to add on to the problem that was created. So, thankfully it was not a big issue population-wise, residential-wise. It was more of an issue of, that's my property, I want to be, I want to continue farming it, I want to use it. And so the idea was that the government of the United States, notwithstanding the fact that they signed the Treaty of Guadalupe saying that the river may change, but the river may change and the boundary may change over many years by attrition. And that is that if the river changes very, very slowly, then that's the boundary. Boundary can move about over 100, 200 years. And the treaty is very clear. If the boundary moves abruptly, then the old boundary stands. So from that point, it could be gauged that it was clearly the property of Mexico that was in dispute.
Could you talk with us a little bit about the Banco Land Treaty of 1905 and what that really did for moving this dispute forward?
Sure. Interestingly enough, the American government and the Mexican government, notwithstanding the Chamizal dispute, from time to time would, because of the river channel changing from sandhill to sandhill, back and forth, snaking back and forth, and creating new channels as time went by. Remember this. Back before 1916, when we built the Alphen Butte and Caballo Dam, the river ran rampant. I mean, it did whatever it wanted to. To give an example, in those years, in the 1800s, early 1900s, the river channel between Juarez and El Paso, downtown, at times was 1 mile in width. So the international boundaries and both governments said, if we have a land dispute, we will come to an agreement that this is yours, this is mine, so forth. In 1934, both governments agreed to man-make a new river channel from Smelter Town all the way to Fort Quitman around Tornillo, and draw a straight line and say this will be our new river. What's on this side of the river, called Banco lands, will be U.S., and what's on this side will be U.S. So we traded off thousands of acres that way, except we left the Chamizal area intact because of the international dispute. That's what really gave the two governments in the very, very beginning of 1960 the legal basis to say, all right, we've done this before, we can do it again, and we will exchange properties and settle this dispute.
What really, began that official settlement of the dispute? Was it the negotiations that happened in Mexico City from the beginning to really make an agreement that, hey, we're going to put this thing to rest?
Well, we have to go back a little bit. In the 1880s, 1890s, and 1900s, the, quote, battle between the two countries was intense. Diplomatically and through ambassadors and so forth, an exchange of notes. It was not until 1911 that the two governments said, you know what, let's settle this once and for all. We're going to have a tribunal. We're going to have a fellow from Canada, we're going to have a fellow from the United States, and one from Mexico. These will be the tribunal commissioners that will hear all the evidence of this dispute with all the engineering, all the geology, all the geography, and at the end of the tribunal, we will vote to see who is right. And so, from Canada it was Lafleur, from the United States it was McGoffin, and from Mexico it was Commissioner Beltran, I think, who was the commissioner. At any rate, they voted like judges, and the vote was 2-1 in favor of Mexico. Well, the United States wasn't ready to agree. They said, notwithstanding the fact that 2 of the commissioners voted in favor of Mexico, there's still some technicalities that we have to take care of. And so what was supposed to have ended in 1911 was painfully brought on until 1961. And there were different efforts made through that period until John F. Kennedy and Adolfo Lopez Mateos met in Mexico City and decided to resolve this issue once and for all. That this was long-standing, it was a thorn between the two governments, and we should get rid of it and settle it. Not only get rid of it, but make an example to the world that we could and we can agree on things and make things better.
Well, during this time, you were also a young city planner working in El Paso. I was wondering, what was it like to be tasked with being involved with this, and what were your responsibilities and to really help with this convention?
Well, you know, Anthony, there's very few of us left and that really had our hands on the whole process. I think there's 2 or 3 of us that are actually alive. But back then, it was, I had just gotten out of the Air Force, came back from Europe, and I was just by chance fell into city planning in El Paso as a designer, cartographer, beginning city planner. And by luck, I began my career as a young, energetic artist, demographer, cartographer into the Chamizal. So it was just like, it couldn't have been better. Here, you know, it was like the beginning of a long career, but once I got into the Chamizal and was able to work with these giants of leaders that were in place at that time, it was, I couldn't wait for the next day to come on and get into it, and get into the concepts and get into the issues of the relocation of the river channel, of relocating people, of working with Mexico and our counterparts in the design of the memorial, of the design of the parks, of the new international bridges, and to have the excitement that this was happening in El Paso and would be of historic consequences.
You had the opportunity to work with your counterparts in Mexico. What types of relationships did you develop from that, and did you have some, friendships come out of that as well?
The friendships that I made during the process lasted a lifetime. I was fortunate to be totally bilingual, thanks to my parents. So it was very easy to work with Mexico. I understood Mexican government from my childhood. Although I was born in the United States, my parents were from Mexico. And so they kind of, told us or instructed us in Mexican politics and in the language and so forth. So, yes, I developed some absolutely great friendships in Juarez, in Chihuahua, in Mexico City, in working with my counterparts in Juarez and in Mexico City, basically those two. And so over the years, 30, 40, 50 years, we continued to talk and to visit each other. And so those were things that, you always cherish. They're valuable to you lifetime.
I've had an opportunity to visit the memorial, and it's many times when we think about memorials, they're put up because of to remember those who are lost in a war. However, this memorial is a memorial of peace and friendship, from what I saw, and a relationship between two countries. I was wondering if you could talk about that and about the history.
Sure.
With that memorial.
This particular memorial is, I think, unique. Number one, it is an urban national park created under the Department of the State Department and then the Department of Interior. And from the very beginning, although it was not in the memorials, both memorials, there's one in Juarez, one in El Paso, the original treaty agreements did not have the memorials. But through the local effort, and I must give credit to both governments, they were very enthusiastic about creating or thinking of the design of a memorial, a lasting memorial that would commemorate this fantastic agreement between the two countries, two friendly countries, and that we came to an accord that would last hopefully for centuries, to understand that two governments, two independent and sovereign countries can get together and agree on things.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the treaty, but also marks the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy, and many are remembering him this year and paying tribute to his legacy with this. I was wondering if you could talk about that and also the work that President Johnson did to see this through.
Well, the beginning of the Chamizal agreement and solution was John F. Kennedy's. Unfortunately, we lost our president almost at the very end of the total agreement by both countries, but President Lyndon Johnson picked it up from that. Of course, he became president, and he carried the whole program through. Everything that was begun happened, and everything that the city requested from the federal government came about. It actually happened because Lyndon Johnson understood that by implementing the treaty, it would affect El Paso. It would affect a city that really didn't bring this on by itself, that it was not a city sponsored or a city originated process. It was really a federal government that was going to impact the city. Therefore, the federal government should do something to round out and complement the treaty itself.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, but I was wondering if you could share with us what did this treaty do for the city of El Paso, and how did it change that landscape?
You know, from the city's viewpoint, I hope from Ciudad Juarez too, it was a win-win situation. First, we finally settled a dispute that was a problem. The second thing is we were able to improve El Segundo Barrio, Second Ward, because we were able to build a new border highway. We were able to build a very beautiful memorial. We were able to build a beautiful Bowie High School, which is El Barrio's high school, and a vocational school on land that was transferred as part of the Chamizal. So there's a legacy there. There is a meaning of international relations, but there is a meaning to the Mexican-American community as well. So that whole area, which was beforehand pretty dismal. We had a packing company, a meat packing company. We had stockyards. We had rendering plants. We had industry. We had heavy industry surrounding what we know perfectly well was a very, very low-income neighborhood. Lots of tenements, and so all that, as part of the Chamizal, changed. And if you see El Paso, South El Paso now, and that area, which was developed because of the Chamizal, you would say, you know, this is the right way to do urbanism. This is the right way to end or to finish the job.
We just have a couple minutes left, but I was wondering if you could share with us your final thoughts about working with this treaty, your career in El Paso, and your hopes to move on to focus on your painting.
Okay. Well, you know, the treaty and the work that I did was the kind of like the Bachelor of Arts in my career in city planning, because I then got into political science, and then I became a certified city planner. And the whole basis of my whole career with the city, 33 years in the Department of Planning, ending with the being director of planning, was a remarkable experience for me personally, because I felt that this was my area. This is what I wanted to do, in addition to painting. So I set my painting aside, and then I went on to the El Paso Community Foundation, 18 years, and now I am now as a full-time artist, specializing in portrait painting, and there's plenty of work.
All right. Well, we want to thank you for joining us, and also best of luck with your painting and portrait painting, and your gallery as well that you have in Anthony, New Mexico. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Our guest was Nestor Valencia. He is a former chief city planner of the city of El Paso. Nestor was heavily involved in the work with the Chamizal Treaty. I'm Anthony Moreno. Thank you for joining us for Fronteras, a Changing America.